We are completely shocked, unbelievable.
Later, Arafat was seen giving blood in a symbolic gesture of solidarity with America. Arab allies, the Iranian president, and even Libya have strongly condemned what happened, saying that it violates Islamic principles. But on the streets of all these countries, anti-Americanism has been building. Moderates are being eclipsed by extremists after almost a year of violence in the Middle East, the Palestinian Intifada in Israel. We don't wish for the destruction of the American people, says this man. We just want the destruction of Bush and the U.S. Congress because they support Israel. Experts in radical Islamic terrorism say masterminds like Osama bin Laden have cleverly manipulated a real sense of grievance into a willingness by some to become human instruments of mass murder.
Osama bin Laden has been in the Muslim world. Has been capitalizing on very sensitive issues that mobilize the whole Arab and Muslim community. The liberation of Jerusalem, American troop presence in Saudi Arabia, of course the fate of the Iraqi people suffering under sanctions.
This gathered momentum after the Gulf War, when bin Laden bitterly complained about U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia. Troops invited by Saudi leaders to defend against the Iraqis, and yet condemned by bin Laden and extremist Islamic preachers for, quote, desecrating holy sites. In addition, Muslims all over the world have been enraged by a decade of continued bombing against Iraqi military installations and crippling sanctions that have ended up hurting the Iraqi people much more than their intended target, Saddam Hussein and his regime. Experts say terrorism cells manage to operate in America's Arab allies, such as Egypt and Saudi Arabia, as well as Europe and North America. Fearful of a backlash, mainstream Muslim leaders here in Europe are trying to explain that this war on American civilians is a crime that can never be justified as a religious duty.
The position of the Muslim community in the UK, as I'm sure in different parts of the world, is very clear. We condemn utterly and unequivocally the atrocities that has been committed. We believe that the people, the perpetrators of this heinous crime are outside the pale of civilization.
So now British and other world leaders are calling for a global alliance to combat a global network of terrorism, to arrest them cell by cell, shut down their financial support and make it more difficult to forge travel documents. There are no quick fixes, they say, just a long, sustained and difficult campaign. Christiana Manpour, CNN, London.
The President of the United States, flanked by his predecessors, other dignitaries in the nation, leading a nation in sorrow on a day of remembrance and of prayer.
And under heavy security, President Bush sees firsthand the utter devastation unleashed by terrorists in New York City. He's greeted by cheers of USA, USA.
Taking a step toward waging war against terrorism, the House of Representatives joins the Senate in approving $40 billion in emergency spending to help victims and hunt down those responsible for Tuesday's attacks. Welcome back to CNN's continuing coverage of the events surrounding Tuesday's terrible tragedies across the United States. Much of the story that will be underway in the coming days is the economic one, the impact on the U.S. economy, indeed the world economy. Joining us to talk more about that now, CNN's Lou Dobbs of Moneyline. Lou.
Joy, thank you very much. In New York, the president today inspected the devastation and the rescue efforts underway in downtown New York City, because for all that it is, Ground Zero, the devastated World Trade Center complex, it is, in point of fact, the battleground, the first battleground in what the president has termed America's new war. The president today visiting the scene of the terrorist attack on America, the worst attack ever. The president has called Tuesday's terrorist act an act of war. A war, he said, not of our choosing. The conflict, he said, began on a timing and terms of others, but Mr. Bush said it will end in a way and at an hour of our choosing. The president made his way through the still smoking rubble here in New York, and he came with words of sympathy for the families of victims. He came with words of appreciation for the rescue workers who continue to search for survivors and victims, and he came to reassure a shaken public of this nation's strength and its resolve.
America today is on bended knee in prayer for the people whose lives were lost here, for the workers who work here, for the families who mourn. This nation stands with the good people of New York City and New Jersey and Connecticut as we mourn the loss of thousands of our citizens. I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Martin Savage is at the rescue site now and has more on the story. Martin.
Well, we're in the area of Reed and Greenwich Street. That is about 3.5 blocks north of the World Trade Center, or at least where the World Trade Center used to be. In the background, the cloud of smoke you mentioned still billowing high into the sky, replacing once where those twin 110-story towers stood. This is a vital checkpoint of getting in supplies, getting in critical material that is supporting the rescue effort, the ongoing search for survivors. Sadly, there were no reports of any survivors being pulled from the rubble today. And in fact, there have been fewer reports of even contact with anyone that may still be alive. That hasn't dimmed the hopes. Weather was the biggest problem today. It was stormy in New York overnight. It was wet and windy and cold in New York when the sun came up. It made the job of the rescuers very difficult, very slippery, very treacherous. Those literally digging with their hands on the debris pile that now stands about 100 feet tall. On top of that, it was the winds that was also a concern. Towering over their heads are at least 3 buildings that are thought to be critically unstable that could come down. They weren't sure if they could take the wind loads. They are still standing now. They are still digging now. Then came the President of the United States. It was critical to the White House that his visit not disrupt the search for survivors. It did not. But he did go around shaking hands, congratulating those that were working on the job and telling them that they are heroes and they have inspired a nation. He shook about 400 hands, and according to those who were there, they say they liked what the president had to say. After he left, well, the cordon off area where we stand now has begun to resume some normalcy. They want to get back to work, not just to support the effort to find survivors. They're trying to get this area, the financial district, back online. Monday's a critical day. Power is still out. Communications disrupted. They worked all day on that effort, which is also critical as well. And finally, sailing up the Hudson River at this very moment, the U.S. hospital ship Comfort. It will bring comfort and supplies and critical medical supplies to this area that right now could use all the help it could get. Lou?
Martin, thank you very much. Martin Savage. As Martin just said, Wall Street is working mightily to prepare for an opening of the stock market on Monday morning. That is a difficult and arduous task by any standard. Those workers struggling to restore telecommunications, putting those phone lines back up and getting them running, essential to the return of the markets. Computer technicians are working hard. Over the weekend, they are scheduled to be testing software and hardware and communications. Everything from lights to running water must be restored, and it must be checked. Not to mention the actual stability of several of those endangered buildings. From that rubble, Wall Street's key financial institutions are determined to rise and to be fully operational, if not fully recovered, by 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time Monday. Greg Clarkin is here now and has more for us on that part of the story. Greg?
And Lou, this tragedy really has brought together rival exchanges, and they're all working now with the one common and one shared goal of restoring trading by 9:30 Monday morning. They washed away the dirt and the grime, hoping to cleanse Wall Street of the remnants of the attacks on the World Trade Center. But inside the New York Stock Exchange, the challenges to restoring trading ran deeper. There are monumental telecommunications obstacles, including making sure electric and phone service will be intact. And then there is the main issue, making sure the sophisticated network that handles the trades for the NYSE can be processed.
The challenge is recreating the network, the interconnected infrastructure that brings 85 million investors individually and another 10,000 institutions from all over the world.
The New York Board of Trade was located in the World Trade Center complex. It will have a new facility come Monday.
Well, the major issue is we have to make sure that all of our clearing members are able to receive the trades and to clear them. It's one thing to trade, but if you don't match them and clear them, you've got a serious problem.
All of the trading exchanges will be undergoing extensive testing this weekend to spot potential problems.
I mean, we've got to make sure we have adequate power, we have adequate access to downtown, and that we have the telecommunications capability necessary to carry all of this.
Now, the New York Stock Exchange already has stringent security measures in place. They will be upgraded even more, and this goes for tourist employees, just about everybody there. And Dick Grasso, the CEO of the NYSE, said he instructed his security force, if Dick Grasso were to arrive without the proper ID, send him home.
That is all well and good and appropriate. How realistic is it that we can see this stock market, as represented by the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ, open for business Monday? I know they're making a heroic effort. What would you rate the odds at right now?
I think pretty good, Lou. After being down there today and speaking with Grasso and some of the other heads of the various exchanges, they are adamant that they believe they will have trading up and running, speaking with Verizon, handling the telecom side of it. They say they believe they will have service. The question really is the level of service that will be available. And right now they'll be working through the weekend, spot checking things, looking for potential problems and any bugs.
And of course, there are a number of reasons, not the least of them the symbolic reason to restore the world's largest equity market to trading after this vicious act of terrorism. But the fact is that the world economy depends on these markets. The New York Stock Exchange accounting for some $13 trillion in market capitalization, that market alone dwarfing all of the other exchanges in the world, whether Tokyo, whether Frankfurt, or London. Greg, thank you very much. Well, when those markets do resume trading, there is, of course, some fear amongst many that a big sell-off might occur. Christine Romans has been taking a look at the implications of that possibility and has the report for us. Christine Romans.
Lou, it will be normal trading hours here on Monday, but anything but a normal trading day. The opening bell will ring at 9:30. There'll be 2 minutes of silence, and then New York's financial community will try to swallow its pain and trade stocks. Many fear a sell-off soon after the bell. There's the uncertainty lingering after Tuesday's terror attack, and now signs of the economic fallout. Ford will shutter several North American plants and said third quarter earnings will fall more than expected. Disrupted freight service has caused a parts shortage there, so there will be a short shuttering of some plants. General Electric warned World Trade Center related losses at its reinsurance company will cost GE 4 cents a share in the quarter, and some analysts fear the economy will tip into recession.
Undoubtedly, even before Tuesday, the economy was precarious. Consumers were getting nervous. Their debt was very high. They were seeing higher unemployment figures and mass layoffs. And the global economy also was not in all that healthy a position.
A week ago, the Standard & Poor's 500 closed at a 3-year low, and pundits were searching for any sign of economic recovery. Still, there is hopeful talk that corporate buybacks could counter any selling on Monday. Also, Lou, players are reporting a so-called gentleman's agreement to limit short sales. After 4 days of no stocks trading, no one's really sure how markets are going to react, but many players are very quick to note that the initial reaction could be violent, but prices tend to smooth out from there over the next few weeks. Lou?
And of course, we saw that violence in overseas markets immediately following the tragedy at the World Trade Center. But the fact of the matter is we're also seeing a lot of economic signs that suggest some tempering of immediate reaction, aren't we, Christine? Retail sales for the month of August, just as all of the pundits and gurus and savants were suggesting this economy is going into recession, suddenly we see retail sales move higher in August.
And there are analysts who are saying be careful about getting too far ahead on the downside, because maybe if we are here at the bottom of the economy, you could be hurting yourself longer term.
And then there is another factor at work here, and you alluded to it, Christina, a gentleman's agreement, if you will, amongst the major firms to, if not altogether, not conduct any short selling, at least to constrain it so that there will be limited pressure on the downside.
Absolutely. And some folks are saying that so many sectors are already trading near 52-week lows that maybe they are already undervalued here at these levels. It will be very interesting to see what happens on Monday morning.
And Christine, I can't wait to tell you and all of our other viewers, share with you some of the comments, the many comments we received from viewers about what they're going to do Monday and what they recommend that others do. Christine, thank you very much. The Treasury Department announced that it has established a team to target terrorist fundraising. Officials saying that task force will include representatives of the FBI, the CIA, as well as, of course, the Treasury. The Treasury Department saying that team will eventually become a permanent foreign terrorism asset tracking center, meaning they're going to try to find out where the money for terrorists comes from and precisely where it goes. For more perspective now, we turn to Jeremy Siegel. He is professor of finance at the Wharton Business School. Joins us tonight from Philadelphia. Jeremy, good to have you with us.
Good evening, Lou.
As a student of these markets, certainly one of the country's ablest and most knowledgeable observers, give us your judgment about the likelihood that we're going to see these markets open Monday, that importance of that event, and, of course, what will happen.
Well, certainly I think opening is important. I think trying to get back to normal will never be normal again, I think, but in a functioning mode is very important, and I hope they will be able to do it. I also hope, Lou, that the Fed will act very aggressively. I'm actually hoping that before the opening on Monday that they may lower the Fed funds rate by 50 basis points. I think that would be very important, yes.
And why do you see that as so important as compared to providing all of the liquidity that the Fed is making available, both in the international banking system as well as in our American banking system?
Well, they're providing the cash that individuals want to take out of the bank. That's what the liquidity is. It's very much like Y2K when people wanted to take out funds. And that's all well and good, but that doesn't actually lower the interest rates. And you've been looking at the Treasury markets. They're expecting sharply lower rates. They'll be disappointed if the Fed does not follow through.
Jeremy, I think one might even say, in addition to expecting, almost demanding it as we look at what is happening with the two-year note in particular.
Absolutely.
What is your best guess? And we acknowledge, I think, all of us, including certainly you, perhaps you first among all, that any prediction here is simply that, a guess. What is your guess as to what the markets will do, what investors will do come Monday morning?
I think there'll be huge trading. I think trading might set an all-time record on Monday. I think there'll be extreme volatility. I can see the Dow maybe opening down 300-400 points, then surging up 100 and back down, swings that we really have never seen before. I think it would settle down at the end. I think we have to settle down at lower levels because if you take a look at Europe, if you take a look elsewhere, you will see that there hasn't been a recovery in other markets, and I don't think we'll get one here.
Jeremy, let me throw a contrarian bullish outlook at you to see what you would make of it. As we watch what were remarkable services all over the country today, a rather inspiring, I must say, display of patriotism in this National Day of Mourning, is there, in your judgment, room here for some of the experts to be surprised and to see a positive outlook, an economy and a society in this country assert itself more positively, a stronger level of confidence rather than a weaker level of confidence?
It is really heartwarming to see how people have come together, and certainly that is the strength of America. But if we look back, there's no way that this can be positive economically for our country. And as a result, I know I've been hearing some things you have to be patriotic and buy. The problem is, if people do that and then the market goes down later, they're going to feel very resentful because finally the level of the prices is going to be what the level of the economy and the earnings are, no matter really who buys and sells on Monday.
Jeremy Siegel, as always, good to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Lou.
Well, trading today did resume on the New York Mercantile Exchange, but not without some serious problems. Electronic trading did begin at 2:30 this afternoon Eastern Time. It was halted just moments later because of, as you would not be surprised, because of some technical problems. Light sweet crude oil soared more than 8% in those minutes of trading, gaining more than $2 a barrel. The action resumed again at 4 o'clock. It ended just minutes ago. We don't have an official close yet, but light sweet crude oil was higher, up again just about $2 as of about 15 minutes ago. Bonds today surged in price for the second straight day, and investors are continuing to look for a safe haven. Lisa Leiter in Chicago with that story. Lisa?
Lou, for the second straight day here at the Chicago Board of Trade, the mood was somber and trading was thin, but trading was orderly, and that's something that traders say was very important, and prices were much easier to come by than they were yesterday. And in the early going, the government went ahead and released regular new reports on retail sales, producer prices, and industrial production, although those reports went largely unnoticed in the bond market. Instead, here, traders spent a lot more time talking about their friends and colleagues in New York. They swapped survivor stories, and they showed their patriotism by hanging a pullout section from the Chicago Sun-Times with the American flag on it. Again today, Lou, like you said, investors sought the relative safety of short-term government debt. The two-year note surged with that yield falling to a historic low of 2.86%. Lou?
Lisa, thank you very much. Lisa Leiter from Chicago. And now joining me to give us some perspective on this bond market, and in particular the activity and what we can expect in the days ahead, Kathleen Hayes. Kathleen?
Well, you know, there have been so many interesting themes touched on, Lou. I really don't know where to start, because I think there's two important themes coming out. How is the bond market functioning, and how is the economy functioning? In terms of the bond market, let me start there, and let me try to explain to our viewers. You say, the bond market, that's not necessarily my market. I'm not going to trade there. But remember, this is really kind of where the lifeblood of our financial system flows, through the bond market, through the credit markets. It has to be functioning fully and well for this financial system to be fully back on its feet. Like this entire city, people are trying to get there. And in fact, as Lou just said, second straight day of trading, 2 days of rallies. But there are some little glitches beneath the surface. People are working out of back offices. Back offices are not like full offices. The computer systems may not be fully operative. Brokers, in fact, are not able to look at screens. Dealers are not able to look at screens as they were, except in very limited market-making ways. In fact, one guy I talked to today said, I'm doing this like I did 15 years ago. I'm calling up the phone to ask about prices, you know? In terms of the economy, let me say quickly, I think you're very wise to point out this contrarian view. The markets are calling, Jeremy Siegel calling for this aggressive rate cut on Monday. Remember, Bob Matier Wednesday gave a speech, said it's too early to judge the macroeconomic consequences. I think that's going to be the story at the Fed. We may not get that cut as quickly as people seem to want it.
Okay, Kathleen, thanks. Kathleen Hayes. Well, the disaster at the World Trade Center has, of course, affected almost everyone, and certainly the people who often offer guidance and some direction and advice right here on Moneyline. Economist Diane Swank, principal among those, and she joins us tonight from Chicago. And Diane, just a few days ago, was outside the World Trade Center running for her life as that first plane crashed into the World Trade Center. Diane, it is good to have you with us, and we're glad you're safely back in Chicago. Tell us, if you could, what happened?
Well, briefly, I was in the World Trade Center, and thankfully for Kathleen Hayes, I had someplace to go because Kathleen put me up for the last couple days, and as much as I love staying with her and her family, they were wonderful to me. I'm glad to be in Sweet Home Chicago. It was an incredible event. It felt like an earthquake. The Marriott was incredibly good at getting us out. Only thing I kept thinking the entire time was I felt somewhat responsible as a leader of the National Association for Business Economics. I had chosen the World Trade Center as our location. I had some students with us, and the whole time I just kept trying to get people to keep moving forward. As people looked back, they began to panic at what they were seeing, which was a horrendous sight. And what I kept doing was just getting people to move forward, until finally everyone was placed and taken care of at the end of the day. I had to walk my way all the way up from Battery Park to our offices at Bank One, and then to Kathleen's house up in Upper Manhattan. And
then you by automobile back to Chicago because, of course, no airline.
I got an
travel.
automobile, a luxury a limo back to Chicago that broke down. My father had to come pick us up. They also tried to gouge us, but I came to work today for a very important reason. One, my people needed to see me there, and I wanted to prove a point that you can't take us down. We have to keep moving forward and move on, and that's why I'm here today.
Well, Diane, the markets trying to reopen, certainly the equity markets Monday for much that very reason. Your judgment, your best judgment about what we should expect over the course of the next several weeks.
Well, I think Kathleen made some very good points about this issue that the Fed should cut at the onset. We need to see what's going to happen first before the Fed moves. They will move. They've stood up and said we're ready to move. Congress is going to be pouring money into this economy at an extraordinary pace, moving from 20 to 40 billion now just allocated to this crisis alone, increased expenditures on security. The outcome for the economy, although the upfront losses are clearly there for this market, there's also signs for a ray of light at the end of the tunnel, or the silver lining to the horrible gray cloud I walk through. And I think those things will help keep the market calm. We've seen orderly, Lisa used the word orderly, bond market trading. I think there is a real attempt here to try to keep these markets as calm as possible, and we may not see the big price swings, the big dramatic effects that many people are looking for, because I think there is a real resilience and a real attempt to agree to that right now, and I think that's very important.
Well, it is good to see you, Diane, and we're glad you made it safely out along with all those who did, and I know you, like we here, joined those who lost friends, family, loved ones, and colleagues who did not make it out. Diane Swank, thank you.
Thank you.
The attacks on the World Trade Center brought the financial district down. Millions of square feet of office space have been lost. That means lots of companies have to find a place in which to do business. And Peter Viles has that story.
I think what we could simply do there is thinking if we have the space is just put two people in the same room temporarily.
Well, I think in a cubicle.
In a cubicle, yeah.
CEOs do not typically worry about who shares a cubicle, but these are not typical times. This is the old American Express headquarters, structurally sound but damaged. Ken Chenault is moving 5,000 workers, some to this new headquarters in Jersey City, others into two larger leased spaces in the Jersey suburbs.
Fortunately, all of our core operations and processing are outside of our New York headquarters building all around the world, so we have had virtually no interruption of service for any of our businesses across American Express.
15.5 million square feet of office space was destroyed, another 12 million damaged, meaning the city's businesses are now looking for 27 million square feet of space. American Express has already located nearly 1 million square feet for itself. When you include suburban office space, metropolitan New York has 46 million square feet of vacant space available. The problem is finding enough large spaces to replace what has been lost.
It is a game of musical chairs right now, where the major companies are out really in a frenzy looking for the larger blocks of space. And commitments are already being made as we speak. We will be essentially out of large blocks of space by next week.
The scramble to find that space, though, is overshadowed by rescue missions. This staging area is just footsteps from the new American Express headquarters.
The focus has really been on the victims, their families, the rescue workers, and that, I have said to employees, should be the primary focus. The business issues pale in comparison.
Another gentleman's agreement to report tonight, Lou. We understand that several large landlords have made an agreement, an informal agreement, to keep their prices at last week's level, essentially an effort to stop any price gouging in commercial real estate in this city before it starts. Lou?
Profiteering is not going to be a popular activity, nor a very smart or healthy one, I think, in these times. Peter Viles, thank you very much. Well, Chicago's Midway Airport, a private airport south of Chicago, was shut down today after police detained 2 people for questioning there. Police have not yet said why those 2 were detained. Elsewhere, most airports were operational, but at only a fraction of their normal capacity. Of course, all of this has had a major impact on the airline industry, but it does appear tonight that some help is on the way. Congressman Richard Gephardt talking about $12.5 billion in direct support for the industry. Kitty Pilgrim is here and has the story for us. Kitty?
Lou, Congress is requesting a major bailout for the airline industry, and Wall Street estimates that it's about $4.4 billion in losses this year alone. Airlines absolutely have to start flying. Let's go through the numbers on what's going now. United Airlines, which lost 2 planes in the tragedy, completed 84 flights yesterday, scheduled 500 today, and that's out of 2,300 normally. American scheduled 800 flights today, but then had to cancel to New York because of delayed airport openings, and they completed 147 flights. Delta's typical 2,500 flights, 467 completed Thursday, 1,200 flying Friday. But this ground stop is not really the only issue for the airlines. Now, the new FAA guidelines for safety also have a great cost in personnel, and labor for the airlines is very expensive.
Right now, the airlines are looking at all these rules saying, well, how do we restart our operations when we have all these new rules to cope with?
Now, commercial airline pilots also serve in the reserves, and we have these numbers. 50,000 reservists are approved for active duty. 3,500 will be in the initial wave. 13,000 are for Air Force duty, and Air National Guard pilots are needed to man the fighter jets that the Pentagon has put on alert nationwide.
We've had people who are knocking on the doors seeking to help. They want to serve. They want to be a part of this. They're very emotional.
Now, United says some of their employees have been activated. Delta says they're sure they're going to be involved, and they're going to cope with it the same way they did in the Persian Gulf. And American, Lou, says many of their pilots do have a military background, and they are sure that they will be involved in this reserve call-up.
Just as they were in 1990 and 1991. Kitty, thank you very much. And we have, by the way, just received word that Midway Airport has just within the last few moments now reopened. Joining us now to talk about how his company is faring after these attacks, a man who runs a very large business dependent upon air travel and the operational airports around this country, is Jim Kelly. He is the chairman and the CEO of UPS. Good to have you with us. I know these are, as for almost everyone, extraordinarily difficult times. There is so much importance attached to what you do and your competitors, your industry, because so many companies, businesses in all areas of life depend upon your overnight services, your airmail services. What is the status first of that service tonight?
Yeah, well, first of all, Lou, I mean, our biggest concern, of course, was for our people and certainly the victims of this horrible tragedy. We extend our sympathy and our prayers to their families. We were fortunate not to lose any of the many people that we have working in that area. But our system ran pretty strong considering the circumstances. Our people work very hard. We deliver about 10 million ground packages a day and 2 million air packages a day. And with the airline down, of course, a lot of that merchandise went into our ground system. Some of that was delayed. But last night we were up and running and pretty much back to normal.
And when you say normal, pretty much back to normal, is that 80% of normal? Put a number on it for us, would you?
Well, today it'll be 95, close to 90+%. As a matter of fact, we'll be re-implementing our guarantee to our customers as of Monday. So as of Monday, we expect we'll be 100% back. We're getting our worldwide business, our international business up today and over the weekend.
What is your best judgment about the effect on your company and others of the reservist call-up ordered by the President today?
Well, I think the American people, of course, are very resilient. I think a lot of people continue to do business this week, even during this horrible tragedy. Most business was conducted in our country this week, and I think it'll rebound fine. I think the economy, of course, was weak before the tragedy, and I think it'll improve going forward.
Okay. Jim Kelly, Chairman of UPS, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
We're going to go now to our Moneyline contributor, William Cohen, who is also a former Defense Secretary. Bill, good to have you with us.
Great to be here, Lou.
Today we witnessed a president leading this nation through, it seemed to me, two phases, declaring, as he did yesterday, a national day of mourning. You and your wife Janet, I know, were at the National Cathedral for the prayer services, and this president here with a bullhorn in his hand, talking about those who will soon hear from all of America, those who had been responsible for bringing down the walls of the World Trade Center and those other buildings. Is that right? Have we entered a new stage? Is America now engaged in war?
I think quite clearly the President has indicated acts of war have been perpetrated upon the American people. And I think he also made it quite clear that we will respond at a time and place of our choosing. And I think he's going to be very careful with his national security team to evaluate all the options available, military, diplomatic, and economic, and then seek to effectively respond against those who have caused this. So it, in effect, is a call to arms, so to speak, to stiffen the spine of the American people, to tell them that great sacrifice has been required of them in the past, great sacrifice will be required in the future.
And let me ask you, on one front that probably a lot of people are not going to talk about, but intelligence work is going to be so critical a part of the president's war. Do you believe that the United States will be successful in tracing terrorist money through the international banking system? Is this country, in your judgment, prepared to demand that of international banks around the world?
I believe that this administration, this country, will call upon all the international community, financial and otherwise, to contribute their support to rooting out terrorism and the financial network that supports terrorist organizations. I think that the administration will call upon them, and I believe that given the international expressions of support to date, and that we have a very good chance of achieving that.
Bill Cohen, as always, thanks for being with us here. I'm Lou Dobbs. Thanks for being with us, and good night from New York.
I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington. Here's a look at the latest developments at this hour. President Bush has visited the incredible ruins of the World Trade Center in New York. Surrounded by scores of rescuers and volunteers, Mr. Bush vowed that those responsible for Tuesday's attacks, quote, will hear from us soon. In return, he was greeted with thunderous cheers of USA, USA. The Justice Department in Washington identified 19 men suspected of hijacking those 4 planes on Tuesday. All are linked to the accused terrorist Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden is believed to be in Afghanistan, where the United States says he runs his terrorist operation. The U.S. Senate, followed by the House of Representatives, has approved $40 billion in emergency spending to wage war on terrorism and aid victims of Tuesday's attacks. President Bush also authorized the call-up of some 50,000 military reservists for, quote, homeland defense. Joey?
Wolf, let's continue now. Look at this hour. This is a live picture of Lower Manhattan. If you could look from Midtown down to Lower Manhattan, this is what you would see at this hour. Look a little bit closer at what is still smoldering, the ruins of the World Trade Center. Already, rescuers have removed 10,000 plus tons of debris from the big crater left of the World Trade Center. Thousands of people involved in rescue and support. You see them working away desperately in their efforts at this hour. And at this hour, there remain 4,763 people still missing, still not accounted for. And so the work does go on in New York City. Also at this hour, the airports in this nation are getting back in place, getting back and putting more planes in the sky. CNN's Maria Hinojosa is at one of them now. Maria, talk to us about the scene that you are seeing at LaGuardia at this hour.
Joey, it's been yet another frustrating day here at LaGuardia Airport. First of all, the airport has been officially open since this morning, but here at the American Airlines terminal, you can see that the gate down there is closed. And over here, at the ticket counters, just a few people, no lines at all. Beyond that, at the ATA terminal, there is a flight that I've just been told will be departing for Chicago. But again, at the American Airlines information about flights, everything pretty much is saying canceled, 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 canceled. Now, at about 11:20 today, the official ban on takeoffs and arrivals was lifted. But the first plane did not take off here until, good news, 4:30, more or less, here at LaGuardia. When the first plane started taking off, there have been sporadic takeoff and arrivals since then, mostly United and Continental flights. Now, here in the airport, though, things are really far from normal. You hear no announcements. There's nothing of those loudspeakers making announcements of when planes are going to be taking off or not. You see a lot more presence of U.S. Marshals and of police, armed customs officials, for example. But even so, given the fact that people have been stranded here for 3 to 4 days now, the mood among many of the people has been very calm. Of course, that's tempered with the fact that they have just, as all of us here, suffered through an extraordinary tragedy. So many people are saying the fact that we are here, that we can't take off for another couple of days, we are alive, and that's what's most important. In terms of pilots, there are discussions among the Airline Pilots Association to perhaps revamp regulations, perhaps fortifying cockpit doors, perhaps allowing pilots to carry firearms or stun guns. So while things have clearly changed on land, things will also change in the air. Joey?
CNN's Maria Hinojosa at LaGuardia. Now we move back to Wolf in Washington.
Thank you very much, Joey. Our Patty Davis has been checking in to see what's happening with the aviation industry. First of all, Patty, tell us what we know about those voice and flight data recorders that were recovered from that American Airlines jet that slammed into the Pentagon Tuesday morning.
Well, the National Transportation Safety Board has analyzed those. It was given those last night in conjunction with the FBI and the Justice Department. A Justice Department official tells CNN that the voice recorder on that American Airlines flight that smashed into the Pentagon was indeed, the tape on that was indeed damaged. Not sure how useful that will be to the investigation. Now, overall, though, they're hoping to get some useful information. They still have the flight data recorders that they will get information from. Wolf?
And what about the damage, the incredible damage that's being done to the U.S. Airline industry as a whole? What's happening on that front, and what's the government planning on doing about it?
Well, Congress is looking at a $2.5 billion bailout of the airline industry, really unprecedented for the airline industry. The industry itself is saying that it expects to lose worldwide about $4 billion because of the incidents this week in New York and Washington. That's on top of $6 billion because of the poor economy that the industry was already facing in losses. $10 billion total there. American Airlines, one spokesman telling me today that that certainly will help. The funds will help the airlines weather the latest crisis. Now, overall, about 2,000 airlines, according to the FAA, 2,000 flights were in the air today by midday. That's about half, 40 to 50% of what's normal. In terms of American Airlines, they said they were operating about 30% of normal schedule, including international flights. They gradually will go up to 80% of their schedule. United, 20% of normal schedule. And Delta, domestic flights, they're just saying simply will gradually resume. Now, as of 4 o'clock, the news from the Department of Transportation was that general aviation, which had been restricted, is now allowed to get back into the air. But there are certain restrictions on that. They cannot fly within 25 miles of Washington, D.C. or New York. Now, overseas carriers as well allowed to get back into the air. The FAA saying that indeed they're allowed as long as they meet all the extra security precautions that have been implemented by the FAA, as well as the airports that they're flying from. Now, in terms of airports that are still closed, Washington Reagan is still closed, at least today and tomorrow, until further notice, is what that airport is saying. Boston Logan also closed at this point, but Massport, the Port Authority there in Massachusetts, saying that that airport plans to open as of 5 a.m. Joey?
CNN's Patty Davis for us in our Washington bureau. Again, a live picture of Lower Manhattan at this hour. As we told you, 4,763 people remain unaccounted for from the World Trade Center's attack. But there are some people who are beginning to talk about their experience. Survivors who are speaking from their hospital beds. A short time ago, a victim who is now at Bellevue Hospital, treated at one of the very important emergency centers in New York City, spoke with reporters. Let's listen.
Firemen, the rescuers, they found me.
And how did they get you out? What did they do?
Well, they moved the partition that was behind my back, and they pulled me out by my arms because I was facing in their direction. So they pulled me out by my arms and put me on the stretcher. No, the last thing I knew is I was holding my co-worker hand, and that's when the building fell and we lost, we went apart. I didn't hear anybody else. I didn't see anything else. That was the last thing I knew. The last thing again, I heard somebody yell help twice while I was stuck under the staircase.
One of the survivors of the World Trade Center tragedy, speaking from her hospital bed at Bellevue Hospital in New York. Now we want to return to New York City. Richard Roth, one of our correspondents covering the president's visit to New York, to Lower Manhattan this afternoon. And as you see, the Statue of Liberty is still a beacon shining bright over Lower Manhattan this evening. At this hour, Richard Roth, who has been following the president's tour there, joins us. Richard, is the president still in town?
I believe so, though from our vantage point, he has clearly moved way out of range, and in fact his helicopter landing in Lower Manhattan was also hidden by the skyscrapers, the dark skyscrapers of Lower Manhattan. But holding an American flag and wielding a bullhorn, President George Bush told rescue workers, a representative number of them, that the USA is proud of them. He said, "I can hear you," which after he said, "Can you hear me?" and the crowd of emergency workers cheered very loud when he said, "The rest of the world can hear you." And especially they cheered when he said, "The people who knocked down these buildings," referring to the World Trade Center and surrounding support buildings, "will hear from George Bush and the U.S. soon." He thanked all of the emergency workers for their hard work, said they made the nation proud, and he said the U.S. is sending its love and compassion to everybody who is here. After about 20 hours of gloomy skies, heavy driving rain, the sun actually came out shortly after President Bush set foot on Manhattan Island, and there is a lot of sun now here, but amazingly this huge amount of dust and ash going up into the early evening sky here from the 10,000 and more tons of rubble there. Left from the destruction of the two towers by passenger planes. Joey.
Richard Roth standing by in Lower Manhattan at this hour. Wolf?
Thank you, Joey. Let's go back to CNN's Martin Savage. He's down near all of that rubble at Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan. Marty, tell us about some of the other buildings that are still up, those huge buildings, but they seem the windows are all out. Are those buildings going to be able to be renovated? Are they still going to survive this disaster?
No, there are a number of them that are not going to survive the disaster. The big question that's being asked at this point is, will they come down on their own, or will they be pulled down? And if they're pulled down, when and how is that going to happen? The concern is for actually 3 buildings, which are said to be so structurally unsound, they could potentially collapse at any moment. It is something that has concerned the engineers that have been watching over those buildings, because those buildings hang over the very people that are trying to rescue and search for any survivors. So it is a critical issue of the moment. It was very critical when the winds were blowing and the storms were in the New York area. As you can see, the skies have cleared, but the smoke continues to billow from building number 7 that's collapsed behind us here, and the remains of the Twin Towers, a debris pile that now measures about 100 feet tall, from buildings that used to stand 110 stories in the air. As for the other buildings, they did sustain heavy damage. The difficult part here is that some of the buildings that look so heavily damaged may in fact be the ones that are more structurally sound. Yet the newer ones that didn't seem to suffer as much damage, or buildings that almost seemed untouched, have been told to us as being in danger of falling down. It's an unusual dichotomy here, and appearances are not what they seem. They watch the buildings, they hope to make repairs. Finding survivors is the first priority. Wolf?
So Marty, what you're saying is that those hundreds of search and rescue people that are engaged in this operation right now and dealing with all the rubble, perhaps including the reporters like yourself who are there, there's still a serious danger to all of them.
Well, there is a threat. They try to manage the danger. As I say, the engineers literally watching the back of these rescuers, and they have gone into the buildings, continue to go into the buildings, monitoring the cracks, monitoring any change, listening for sounds of shifting. And so that is something that they will watch very carefully. It is a danger, but they realize that the possibility of finding a survivor, at least in the minds of the rescuers that they tell us, is much greater than worrying about buildings coming down on them.
And I take it, Marty, that people are already looking ahead to some of those other buildings that were near the World Trade Center, some of those huge buildings, and we're looking at some of those pictures right now of the necessity of having to implode them the way we've seen old buildings around the country from time to time being imploded.
It's clear that some of these buildings, I'm not going to mention specifically yet because they are still trying to make determinations, but a number of these buildings will have to come down. They are just not safe enough to continue to be in this area. So it's not just the Twin Towers, it is this whole area that will have to undergo a complete renovation. At last report, there were at least some 25,000 people that were made homeless as a result of the disaster that happened here. Of course, that is a minor difficulty on top of the cataclysmic tragedy that many families have suffered. Well,
and we've heard, Marty, of many family members trying to reach the rubble, even though it is, as you point out, very dangerous. What are the police and other law enforcement authorities doing to keep family members, loved ones, friends who just are desperately searching for their the loved ones away from that scene?
Well, in fact, there are a number of family members that we have run across that are now acting as volunteers that went into the debris. I talked yesterday to a man whose son is a New York City firefighter who's now missing. He showed up yesterday with the son's dog. He hopes with the dog and with himself that they can go and find his son. And then there was another case of a young man, an engineer, who also showed up to volunteer to carry out by hand buckets of dirt. He isn't there because of his engineering expertise. He's there because his brother was in one of those Twin Towers and is now missing. That's how the relatives come here to find their own.
Well, one final question, Marty, before I let you go. Is there a need for more volunteers? Because I'm sure there are people not only in the New York City area, but all over the country, perhaps around the world, who would be more than happy to come to New York and volunteer for that kind of work if, in fact, there is a need.
Well, the need is a question that needs to be worked out. There are a lot of volunteers, a lot of professionals that have shown up from other communities. The question is, how long can they stay? Many of them will have to leave perhaps by the end of this weekend and begin returning to their own jobs and to their own police or professional jobs that they have. So who will come in to take their place? It's being organized. In fact, for the first time today, one rescuer said, "We finally got it organized inside." Wolf.
Thank you very much, Marty Savage, in Lower Manhattan, near the scene of all of that rubble. Joey?
Wolf, the Bush administration has talked about the exiled Saudi millionaire Osama bin Laden as being the main suspect behind Tuesday's attack. Joining us now to talk more about Osama bin Laden is Hisham Melhem, who is the Washington bureau chief of the Lebanese newspaper Al-Safir. Mr. Melhem, if you can talk to us a little bit, there has been sort of this knee-jerk gut reaction among many people in the United States that if Osama bin Laden can be proven to have ties to these attacks, then a swift, quick strike on this individual is the way to go, is the way to retaliate. Is it that simple?
Well, it's not that simple. I mean, I think that you cannot combat terrorism, especially terrorism of this kind, by military means alone, and you cannot combat it without the support, at least the tacit support and approval, and maybe the explicit collaboration of regional powers. And that's why, to begin with, you have to identify the enemy. This is obviously a new war, but it's you're dealing essentially with a faceless enemy, an unorthodox enemy, using unorthodox means, and it requires a great deal of specificity. And I think the people of the region will probably go along with retribution and punishment if it is directed at the culprit alone, after you come up with convincing evidence. But people in the region would like to, who obviously looked at what happened in New York and Washington with a mixture of revulsion and shock and disbelief, would like also the administration here in Washington to be cognizant of the fact that even those in the region who criticize certain U.S. policies in the region definitely would never condone such heinous crimes such as we've seen on Tuesday.
There is a difference.
First you have to identify the enemy and then deal with it, but clearly deal with it also in context.
Well, talk to us on the couple tracks that you started out by outlining, one of those being the notion of a military strike being the appropriate response. Why is that not? I mean, talk to us specifically about why a military strike might be A, so difficult in the region, and B, produce some consequences that people might not have considered.
I'm not saying no military strikes in absolute terms, but if you're talking about lashing out as without really defining the enemy, coming up with strong convincing evidence and work with the neighboring states on a clear strategy, you probably end up repeating what happened in 3 years ago when Osama bin Laden's camps were bombed to no avail, and when the United States bombed a pharmaceutical plant in Khartoum, Sudan, that was the wrong target.
And there was anger. I mean, this generated actual anger among some people who may have peripherally supported the same notions as bin Laden, but might have actually been motivated to back him more specifically as a result.
I mean, that created a great deal of anger, absolutely. But again, just as people here understandably are angry and outraged and frustrated because civilians were killed for no reason, I think people in the region, if they see that the American retribution is going to lead to civilian casualties, to so-called collateral damage, also they will be very angry. Things in the region are at the boiling stage. We've seen what's taking place in the Palestinian-occupied territory. There is a great deal of anger. There is a great deal of frustration in the Arab street. And of course, nothing justifies, no cause, no grievance, no religion justifies what happened in New York. But then again, leaders in this country are called upon at this stage to deal with the situation rationally, in a cold-blooded fashion, if you will, and deal with this incredible phenomena, which not only threatens the United States or the West, it also threatens the existing way of life in the region. Osama bin Laden is one of those false prophets, self-appointed angels of death, who are wreaking havoc not only in the West, but also in the Arab world. But you have to define the enemy, and you have to work with the neighbors, and you have to also address the political grievances in the region. Again,
Mr. Mellon, I ask you to stand by for a moment here because you have very important information, but we also want to give our viewers a notion about what is happening right now in New York City. In fact, this is New York Harbor, and you see the red crosses painted on that ship. That is the USNS Comfort. This is a ship brought to support the many rescuers involved in the efforts at the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. Of course, you understand that many of those people have come from other places, both in the city, outside the city, in the region as well, to support the situation there. But they are exhausted. They need assistance. They need a place to rest. And so they have brought the USNS Comfort into New York Harbor so that those people would be able to have a little time to rest, a little place to get a little rest and a little quiet in the midst of all the hard work they are doing. Also at this hour, in fact at 7 o'clock Eastern, we are anticipating in many places in the country a candlelight vigil, and at this hour that has already begun in Birmingham, Alabama. You see there a ceremony underway, a very solemn evening, even for Birmingham, so far away from the images of New York, of the World Trade Center Tower, so far away from the Pentagon. Even in Birmingham, Alabama, there is this commemoration this evening, and as you see, candles being readied for the many people who are being involved. I know that there are being emails passed around all over the country today. In fact, I've received some myself from people suggesting that tonight is the night, that 7 o'clock this evening is a time for the entire nation to stand unified, to light these candles of remembrance, of hope and honor for those who have been lost. Wolf.
Going around elsewhere around the United States, we're now looking at a picture from Somerset, not yet, but we shortly will be looking at a picture from Somerset, Pennsylvania. Here it is right now. Somerset, Pennsylvania, of course, not far from the crash of that other airliner that went down in Pennsylvania, the plane that was supposedly turning around, heading back towards Washington. But after reports of a struggle on board, the plane crashing near Somerset, Pennsylvania, about 80 miles or so outside of Pittsburgh. This candlelight ceremony in Somerset about to begin, as are candlelight ceremonies all over the United States. An outpouring of sympathy and support. Here's another candlelight ceremony in nearby Arlington, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C., where I am. Arlington, Virginia, right across the Potomac River, not far, of course, from the Pentagon, where that American Airlines jetliner smashed into the Pentagon early Tuesday morning. Arlington, Virginia, home of so many government employees and officials who work, in fact, at the Pentagon, outpouring of support around the United States. These candlelight ceremonies, by the way, were well coordinated around the country through the internet. Let's listen to this ceremony that's now going on in Birmingham.
From the city, way out on the farm, our hearts still bleed red, white, and blue. I'm proud to be an American. I'm proud to take a stand. I'm proud to tell the whole wide world that I'm American. Oh, beautiful.